It's strange how life can flip upside down in the blink of an eye, isn't it? For 10 years I thought I knew my reality. I had this beautiful, mischievous little boy who filled my days with laughter, chaos, and let's be honest, a fair share of headaches too. I thought I knew him better than I knew myself. Every giggle, every scraped knee, every tear wiped away. It all painted a picture of a bond one thought was unshakable. But all that came crashing down the moment I learned the truth. My child wasn't my child. He'd been switched at birth. Just writing that feels like I'm still living in someone else's nightmare. The revelation didn't come gently. Oh no, it barged into my life like a wrecking ball, smashing every sense of certainty I had. I remember sitting at the doctor's office, staring at a piece of paper that didn't make any sense. A DNA test, meant to rule out a rare genetic condition, revealed something so much worse. My son didn't share my DNA. Can you imagine? The floor felt like it gave out beneath me. My first thought, there had to be a mistake. But deep down, that nagging whisper of doubt was there, reminding me of little things I'd brushed off over the years. The emotions hit like waves: shock, anger, heartbreak. My mind kept racing. Who is he? Where is my biological child? How could this have happened? And maybe the heaviest question of all, what does this mean for the family I've built? My husband tried to be the rock, but I could see the cracks forming in him too. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a betrayal of the deepest kind. A breach of trust in a system we're supposed to rely on during the most vulnerable moments of our lives. And yet, as devastating as it all was, I knew this wasn't just about me. Somewhere out there, another family had been living a lie too. Their child was my child, and mine was theirs. The weight of that truth was unbearable. But it also pushed me to act. Had to know more. I had to untangle the mess and find a way to move forward. For the sake of both boys, for all of us. That's where the real journey began. A story of heartbreak and hope, loss and love, betrayal and forgiveness. Because this wasn't just about finding answers. It was about rediscovering what family truly means. Looking back, the early days of motherhood felt like stepping into a dream I didn't want to wake up from. When they handed me my baby at the hospital, I remember feeling this overwhelming wave of love, a connection so immediate it was almost primal. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and in that moment the rest of the world just disappeared. I mean, isn't that what they say? That becoming a mother changes you. And boy, did it ever. The first night home was chaotic but magical. The nursery, painted in soft pastel blues, was ready to welcome him, even if I wasn't entirely sure I was ready myself. Every little cry pulled at my heart, and every coo melted it. I remember his first bath. Let's just say it involved a lot of splashing, more on me than him, and an immediate Google search on how to bathe a newborn without making a mess. Those moments, as messy and unpredictable as they were, became the foundation of a bond one thought nothing could ever break. As he grew, so did my confidence as a mom. His first steps. Oh, I've watched that video so many times the memory feels almost like a movie. He was wobbly and determined. His little feet carrying him straight into my arms. His first words were even better. Mama. Although my husband insists it sounded more like banana. Those milestones were proof, or so I thought, that we were on this perfect little journey together. I couldn't imagine life without him. I didn't want to. But then there were those small moments, the ones I pushed aside without much thought. Like the time at the pediatrician when the doctor casually mentioned how unusual his eye color was, given mine and my husband's. Genetics are funny sometimes, the doctor had said with a laugh. I laughed too, but there was this tiny voice in the back of my mind whispering, is it really that simple? And then there were the questions from friends and family. Harmless but persistent. Are you sure he didn't get that nose from the mailman? They'd joke. I'd laugh it off, but deep down I sometimes wondered. Still, those fleeting doubts couldn't touch the love I felt for him. Every scraped knee I kissed, every sleepless night spent rocking him back to sleep, every crayon drawing proudly displayed on the fridge. It all reinforced this deep, unshakable belief that he was mine. I poured my heart and soul into being the best mom I could be, juggling work, school projects, and those endless piles of laundry that seemed to multiply overnight. But life isn't a straight line, is it? It's full of twists and turns, some so sharp they leave you reeling. If you told me back then that those seemingly insignificant details, the eye color, the jokes, even the way he'd sometimes feel like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit, were breadcrumbs leading to a truth I couldn't yet see, I wouldn't have believed you. Why would I? Everything felt so real, so complete. Then there was the hospital itself. I remember the chaos of that day like it was yesterday. The sounds of babies crying, nurses rushing from room to room, and the overwhelming sense of exhaustion mixed with joy. It wasn't until much later that I'd replay those moments in my mind, searching for something, anything, that could explain how such an unthinkable error could have happened. Was it the nurse who seemed distracted? The rushed paperwork? The brief moments they took him away for tests? At the time, none of it registered as unusual. But hindsight, as they say, is 20/20ths. And yet, even with all the what-ifs and lingering doubts, the years that followed felt like a dream. Birthday parties with balloon animals and cake-streaked faces. Christmas mornings with toys scattered across the living room floor. Bedtime stories where his little voice would chime in, correcting me if I skipped a word. Those were the moments that defined us, that made us a family. I couldn't have known then that the dream was built on a fragile foundation. That behind the laughter and love, there was a truth waiting to shatter everything I held dear. But the thing about truth is, it has a way of finding you. No matter how tightly you hold on to the lies, you don't even realize you're living. And just like that, the past I thought I knew would soon be rewritten, piece by painful piece. Those perfect memories, once so comforting, would become bittersweet reminders of a life that wasn't entirely mine. But before the truth revealed itself, I had those years of pure, unfiltered love. And maybe, just maybe, that love was real enough to withstand what was coming next. It started as a routine doctor's visit, just one of those checkups you schedule without thinking twice. My son had been dealing with what we thought was a mild allergy, so the doctor suggested a genetic test to rule out any hereditary conditions. Harmless, right? I didn't even flinch when they took the sample. We'd done this sort of thing before, and it always came back with nothing to worry about. But this time the results weren't just unexpected, they were impossible. When the doctor handed me the report, I could see something in her eyes that made my stomach drop. "We need to discuss these results," she said, her voice carefully measured. That's when she dropped the bombshell. "The DNA doesn't match." I stared at her, my mind racing to comprehend what she'd just said. "What do you mean it doesn't match? Are you saying, he's not mine?" I heard my voice crack, the words barely making it out. The doctor hesitated, her face a mix of sympathy and discomfort. "There's no way to say this easily. Based on these results, it appears your son isn't biologically related to you or your husband." And just like that, my world tilted on its axis. My first instinct was denial. This had to be a mistake. Labs mess up all the time, don't they? I demanded a retest, convinced that something somewhere had gone wrong. But deep down something shifted. All those little moments from the past, the jokes, the questions, the tiny discrepancies, came rushing back like a tidal wave. For the first time I couldn't dismiss them. The doctor's words hung in the air, suffocating and relentless. "He's not your biological child." The days that followed were a blur of confusion, anger, and disbelief. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I looked at my son, my heart ached with a mix of love and fear. I wanted to shield him from the truth, even as I knew I had to find it for myself. That's when the real investigation began. I started digging through old hospital records, reaching out to anyone who might have answers. It was like piecing together a puzzle where half the pieces were missing, and the ones I did have didn't fit. When I finally got access to the hospital's files, It felt like opening Pandora's box. There it was, buried in the paperwork. An entry noting a temporary mix-up in the nursery on the day of his birth. My hands shook as I read it. Mix-up. That's what they called it. Like it was some minor inconvenience. Not the life-altering mistake that had torn two families apart. I remember calling the hospital, my voice trembling with anger and desperation. How could this happen? How does a mother leave with the wrong child? Their response was robotic, full of legal jargon and half-hearted apologies. Ma'am, these incidents are extremely rare. We are conducting an internal investigation. But I didn't want their investigation, I wanted my son. The DNA test confirmed what the records hinted at. My biological child was out there, living a life that wasn't his, while I had been raising someone else's. The weight of that realization was crushing. Every memory I'd cherished suddenly felt tainted. Every milestone we'd celebrated clouded by this terrible mistake. But what haunted me most was the other family. Who were they? Did they know? Had they been living with the same doubts, the same questions? Or had they been blissfully unaware, their lives untouched by the storm that had just engulfed mine? The thought of another mother out there, loving my child as fiercely as I loved hers, was both comforting and devastating. Then came the hardest part, telling my husband. He was my rock, my steady hand in the chaos, but this shook him to his core. I'll never forget the look on his face when I told him. It was like watching someone take a physical blow. "What do we do?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. And the truth was, I didn't have an answer. Telling our son was even worse. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that everything he knows about his life isn't true? We decided to keep it simple at first, to shield him from the full weight of it until we had more answers. But even then, his innocent questions cut deep. "Does this mean I'm not your son anymore?" he asked, his eyes wide and tearful. I pulled him close, my heart breaking as I whispered, "You'll always be my son. Always." As the days turned into weeks, the search for the other family consumed us. Every phone call, every email, every visit to the hospital felt like another layer of heartbreak. When we finally got a name, another mother, another father, it felt surreal. These were the people who had been raising my biological child, who had been living the life I was supposed to have. But meeting them was a whole other level of emotional upheaval. We arranged to meet in a neutral space, a small conference room provided by the hospital. Walking into that room felt like stepping into another dimension. There they were, holding hands tightly, their faces a mirror of the fear and pain I was feeling. And sitting next to them was a boy with my eyes, my smile. I'll never forget the moment our eyes met. It was like looking at a stranger and yet feeling an undeniable connection. I wanted to run to him, to wrap him in my arms and tell him everything. But I couldn't. Not yet. This was a delicate process, one that required patience, even when every instinct screamed at me to act. The meeting ended with more questions than answers, but it was the start of something bigger. A journey to untangle the lives that had been so carelessly switched, to find a way to move forward despite the overwhelming pain and confusion. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would test every ounce of strength and love I had. The moment we met them, the family that had unknowingly been living our life, was surreal. I remember walking into that sterile conference room, the fluorescent lights humming softly above us. My heart was pounding in my chest as if it might burst, and my hands were clammy with nerves. There they were, a man and woman who looked just as lost as we felt, sitting across the table with a boy who looked strikingly like my husband. It was undeniable. In that instant, every doubt I'd been holding on to evaporated. That boy was ours, and yet he wasn't. The mother, let's call her Lisa, had a trembling smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her husband, Tom, sat stiffly beside her, gripping her hand like a lifeline. Their son, our biological son, was quiet, clearly confused about why he was there. And honestly, who could blame him? How do you explain something this complex to a child? It was like staring into a mirror that reflected a different life, a life I should have had but didn't, and they probably felt the same way. The first words exchanged were hesitant, cautious. "Hi, I'm Sarah," I said, my voice shaking. "This is my husband, Mike." Lisa responded in kind, her voice cracking as she introduced herself and her family. The room was heavy with unspoken emotions: fear, curiosity, and most of all, heartbreak. When the initial awkwardness passed, we began to share stories, piece by piece. Lisa told us about the day her son was born, how they'd waited years to have a baby and how overjoyed they were when he finally arrived. It mirrored our story in so many ways, yet the differences were glaring. She talked about how he loved soccer, how his laugh was contagious, and how he had this odd little habit of tapping his foot when he was thinking hard. I smiled through tears, realizing that these were quirks I might never have discovered on my own. In return, I told them about the boy I had raised, about how he loved dinosaurs so much that our living room was practically a prehistoric jungle for years, about how he once tried to fix the family dog with a toy stethoscope when she was sick. Lisa laughed softly, her eyes welling up with tears. There was a strange comfort in knowing that both boys had been loved, deeply and unconditionally, even if it was by the wrong parents. But it wasn't all warm anecdotes and bittersweet smiles. The questions began to surface, the ones none of us could avoid. How had this happened? Why hadn't the hospital caught the mistake sooner? And perhaps the most painful question of all: what do we do now? For Lisa and Tom, the idea of giving up the boy they'd raised was as unthinkable as it was for us. "He's our son," Lisa said firmly, her voice breaking. "But we know he's your son too." That statement hung in the air, a paradox that none of us could reconcile. How could these boys belong to two families at once? As we talked, it became clear that neither of us wanted to lose the children we'd come to know and love. But the reality was, there were no easy answers. The boys had a right to know the truth about their identities, but how would that truth affect them? Would it bring closure, or would it tear them apart? The first meeting ended with a tentative agreement. We would take things slowly, for the sake of the children. We exchanged phone numbers, promising to stay in touch as we navigated this uncharted territory. But as we left the room, the weight of the situation settled heavily on my shoulders. The idea of sharing our son, of sharing both boys, was almost too much to bear. Over the weeks that followed, we began to meet more regularly. The boys were introduced gradually, starting with brief, supervised playdates. Watching them together was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. They bonded quickly, as if some unspoken connection drew them together. And yet, every time I saw our biological son, I couldn't help but feel the sting of all the moments I'd missed. His first steps, his first words, the milestones that had been stolen from me. Lisa confessed to feeling the same way about the boy I had raised. "I see him and think, that's my baby," she told me one afternoon, tears streaming down her face. "But then I realize I don't even know him." It was a sentiment I understood all too well. One of the most challenging moments came when we decided to explain the situation to the boys. We gathered them together, sitting in a circle in Lisa and Tom's living room. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with anticipation. We kept it simple, telling them that there had been a mistake when they were born and that they were each connected to two families. Our son looked at us with wide, questioning eyes. "So they're my parents too?" he asked, his voice small. I nodded, fighting back tears. "Yes, but that doesn't change how much we love you. You're still our son." He seemed to accept it, at least on the surface, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind. The other boy, quieter by nature, simply nodded, though I could tell he was struggling to process it all. As time went on, our families became entwined in ways I never could have imagined. We shared holidays, attended school events together, and slowly began to build a new kind of relationship, one that was equal parts beautiful and complicated. But the road wasn't without its bumps. There were arguments, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt. I remember one particularly difficult day when Lisa and I had a heated disagreement about schooling. "He's my son too," she said, her voice rising. "I have a say in this." The word stung, but she was right. This was the new reality we had to navigate. 2 families, 2 sets of parents, and 2 boys caught in the middle. Through it all, though, one thing became clear. Love, no matter how messy or complicated, was at the center of everything we did. And that love would guide us as we continued to figure out what it meant to be a family in this extraordinary, heart-wrenching situation. But even as we made progress, the shadow of the past lingered. The hospital's mistake had set all of this in motion, and the fight for accountability was just beginning. The weeks that followed our initial meetings were some of the most confusing and emotionally draining of my life. Every day felt like a mental tug-of-war between my heart and my head. What was the right thing to do? And, more importantly, was there even such a thing as a right choice in this situation? I was staring down a dilemma that didn't come with a roadmap or clear answers. Only impossibly difficult decisions that would impact everyone involved, especially the boys. On the one hand, the boy I had raised for 10 years was my son in every way that mattered. I had been there for his first word, his first fall off a bike, his first day of school. I knew the exact way his nose scrunched up when he was deep in thought, and the way his laugh could light up a room. But now, every time I looked at him, I couldn't help but feel this pang of guilt. He wasn't mine, not biologically, and another mother had spent a decade longing for those same milestones. On the other hand, there was my biological son, the boy I should have known but didn't. I could see pieces of myself in him. The way he tilted his head when he was curious, the subtle dimple in his left cheek when he smiled. It was eerie, almost surreal, to see my own traits reflected in someone who felt like a stranger. But how could I possibly take him away from the family he had always known and loved? The mere thought felt cruel, even selfish. And then there were the legal questions. Who had the right to these children? Did it even make sense to talk about rights when lives and emotions were on the line? The idea of custody battles made my stomach churn. I didn't want to rip the boys apart or force them into some rigid arrangement where they'd be shuffled back and forth like pieces on a chessboard. But the alternative, leaving things as they were, felt just as unbearable. How could we pretend everything was normal when the truth had already unraveled our lives? Ethical concerns loomed large over every conversation we had. My husband and I spent countless sleepless nights going in circles, debating what to do. "What if we leave things the way they are?" he asked one night. His voice tinged with exhaustion. "They're happy, aren't they? Why disrupt their lives more than we already have?" I knew he was trying to protect everyone, but the thought of walking away from my biological child, of never truly knowing him, was a pain I couldn't bear. Then there was Lisa and Tom, who were grappling with their own version of the same dilemma. Lisa confided in me one afternoon during one of our meetings. Her eyes red from crying. "I want to hold him, to tell him he's mine," she said, her voice trembling. "But I don't want to hurt him, or you." It was a sentiment I understood all too well. We were both trapped in a web of love and heartbreak, and there was no easy way out. The boys, of course, were at the center of everything. We tried to shield them as much as possible, but kids are perceptive. They could sense the tension, the way we tiptoed around certain topics. My son, well, the boy I had raised, started asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. "Why do we have to see them so much?" he asked one evening. His tone tinged with frustration. "They're not my family." His words cut deep, but I couldn't blame him. How could a child understand the complexity of what we were dealing with when even the adults were struggling to make sense of it? We decided to seek professional guidance, bringing in therapists to help us navigate the emotional minefield. The sessions were enlightening but also painfully raw. The boys needed reassurance that they were loved, unconditionally, by both families. We needed tools to process our grief, anger, and confusion. The therapists emphasized the importance of open communication, of creating a space where the boys could express their feelings without fear of judgment. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. In the midst of all this, I found myself reflecting on the concept of family. Was it biology that made someone a mother? Or was it the years of scraped knees, bedtime stories, and shared memories? Could it be both? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that love doesn't fit neatly into a box. It's messy, complicated, and sometimes downright painful, but it's also what gives us the strength to face impossible situations like this one. One evening, as I sat alone in the quiet of the house, I pulled out an old photo album. Page after page, I saw the boy I had raised smiling back at me. His first Halloween costume. His gap-toothed grin on his first day of kindergarten. The time he fell asleep clutching his favorite dinosaur toy. Tears streamed down my face as I realized something important. No matter what happened, he would always be my son. And yet, I couldn't deny the growing ache in my heart for the boy I was just beginning to know. The one who shared my blood but not my memories. The hardest part of all was realizing that there was no perfect solution. No way to make everyone whole again. But as painful as the choices were, I knew we had to make them together. As two families united by an unimaginable mistake. We owed it to the boys to give them the love and stability they deserved, even if it meant breaking our own hearts in the process. In the end, the question wasn't about what was fair or just. It was about what was best for the children, even if it meant sacrificing our own desires. But before we could move forward, there was one more battle to fight. One that would force us to confront the very institution that had set this tragedy into motion. When you're hit with a revelation that your entire life has been flipped upside down, there's a natural instinct to want someone, anyone, to be held accountable. For me, that instinct came roaring to life as soon as I saw the word mix-up in the hospital records. I mean, how does something so monumental, so life-altering, get reduced to a two-word note? My anger felt like a storm brewing inside me, and I knew I couldn't just sit back and let it go. The hospital had to answer for what they'd done, not just to me but to Lisa, to our boys, to all of us. Started with phone calls, endless phone calls. Each one led to another dead end, another department that claimed they didn't have the answers I was looking for. "We're looking into it," they'd say, their voices dripping with polite detachment. But looking into it wasn't enough. I needed answers. I needed to know how two babies could have been switched and sent home with the wrong families, and I needed to know what they were going to do to make it right. The more I pushed, the clearer it became that this wasn't going to be a simple process. The hospital's representatives were quick to remind me of the statute of limitations, of how much time had passed since the boys were born, as if that somehow absolved them of their negligence. My husband and I sat down with a lawyer, hoping for some clarity, but even he warned us that the road ahead would be long and grueling. "These cases are notoriously difficult," he said, his tone serious. "Hospitals have teams of lawyers whose sole job is to minimize their liability." Despite the warnings, we decided to move forward with legal action. Lisa and Tom joined us in filing a lawsuit against the hospital, uniting our families in a way we never could have anticipated. The process was exhausting. Every piece of evidence had to be meticulously documented, every conversation scrutinized. Depositions dragged on for hours, forcing us to relive the pain of discovering the truth over and over again. Times it felt like the system was designed to wear us down, to make us question whether it was even worth it. But we pushed on because this wasn't just about us anymore. It was about making sure no other family ever had to go through what we were enduring. The idea that another mother could unknowingly raise someone else's child, that another child could grow up disconnected from their biological roots, was unbearable. The hospital needed to be held accountable, not just for our sake, but for the sake of every family that trusted them with their most vulnerable moments. As the case gained traction, it began to attract media attention. Reporters wanted to know every detail: how we discovered the mix-up, how the boys were handling the transition, whether we planned to swap the children back permanently. Their questions were invasive, often insensitive, but we knew the attention could work in our favor. The more people heard our story, the harder it would be for the hospital to sweep it under the rug. One of the hardest parts of the legal battle was facing the hospital's defense team. They painted a picture of overworked staff, outdated procedures, and an honest mistake that had spiraled out of control. No system is perfect, their lead attorney argued during one of the hearings. It was infuriating. Their imperfection had stolen a decade of memories from two families, and they wanted to chalk it up to human error? Felt like a slap in the face. But as much as their arguments angered me, they also highlighted a deeper issue: the systemic failures that had allowed this to happen in the first place. Hospitals are supposed to be places of safety and trust, yet the very systems designed to protect us had failed spectacularly. I started researching, digging into cases of other families who had experienced similar tragedies. What I found was heartbreaking. While rare, baby switching incidents weren't entirely unheard of, and in almost every case, the affected families were left to pick up the pieces on their own. This realization fueled my determination to see the lawsuit through to the end. It wasn't just about winning a settlement, it was about forcing the hospital to take responsibility and implement changes that would prevent this from happening again. Better tracking systems, stricter protocols in the maternity ward, routine DNA testing. These weren't just suggestions, they were necessities. The hospital needed to wake up to the fact that their negligence had real, devastating consequences. As the trial dragged on, the emotional toll became harder to bear. There were days when I wanted to give up, when the weight of it all felt too heavy. Balancing the legal fight with the complexities of our blended family was overwhelming. The boys were struggling to adapt to their new reality, and the stress of the lawsuit only added to the tension. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep, wondering if we were doing the right thing, if justice was even possible in a situation like this. But then I'd look at the boys, at their resilience, their strength, and I'd find the courage to keep going. They deserved answers. They deserved accountability. And they deserved to know that their parents fought for them, even when it felt like the odds were stacked against us. In the end, the lawsuit was settled out of court. The hospital agreed to a significant financial settlement, though no amount of money could ever truly compensate for what we'd lost. More importantly, they committed to overhauling their maternity ward procedures, implementing new safety measures to ensure that no family would ever have to endure what we had. It wasn't the perfect victory I'd imagined, but it was something. It was a step toward justice and a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable pain, we had the power to make a difference. But as the legal battle came to a close, a new chapter was just beginning. A chapter that would test our ability to heal, to rebuild, and to redefine what it meant to be a family. Rebuilding a life torn apart by something as earth-shattering as a baby switch wasn't just about finding answers or assigning blame. It was about learning how to love and connect all over again. When the dust from the legal battle began to settle, we were left staring at an even harder truth. We had to figure out how to be two families intertwined by biology and circumstance. No guidebook could prepare us for the emotional labyrinth we were about to navigate. The first step was tentative, arranging playdates for the boys. I remember the first one vividly. We decided to meet at a neutral location, a park where they could play without too much pressure. Watching them from a bench, I was struck by how naturally they interacted. It wasn't immediate best friend territory, but there was a curiosity between them that was undeniable. My biological son, let's call him Jack, was quieter, more reserved. He studied everything, including us, like he was piecing together a puzzle. My raised son, who we'll call Ethan, was his usual energetic self, bounding around the playground and inviting Jack to join him in every game. It was a strange mix of emotions, watching them together. On one hand, it was beautiful to see the connection forming, but on the other, it was a painful reminder of what we'd missed. I couldn't help but wonder what their relationship might have been like if they'd grown up as brothers instead of strangers. And yet, there was hope in those moments. Hope that despite everything they could find common ground. The real challenge, though, was building bonds as parents. Lisa and I found ourselves navigating a delicate dance between gratitude and resentment. I was grateful that she had loved and cared for Jack as if he were her own, but there were moments when jealousy crept in. Jealousy for the memories she had, the milestones she'd witnessed that I never got to see. She admitted feeling the same way about Ethan. It was a raw, honest conversation that neither of us had expected to have, but it was necessary. If we were going to make this work, we had to acknowledge the pain alongside the joy. To help the boys adjust, we started small. Weekly visits turned into family outings, trips to the zoo, movie nights, even shared holidays. The first Thanksgiving we spent together was both awkward and heartwarming. Lisa and I worked together in the kitchen, navigating each other's recipes and traditions. The boys, meanwhile, bonded over a football game in the yard. There were moments when it felt almost normal, like we were one big, messy, blended family. But there were also moments when the weight of our situation hung heavy in the air, a reminder that this wasn't your typical family gathering. Therapy became a cornerstone of our journey. The boys had their own sessions, where they could express their feelings without fear of judgment, and we had ours as parents. The therapists emphasized the importance of honesty and patience, reminding us that healing wasn't linear. Some days were good, filled with laughter and connection, but others were fraught with tension and misunderstandings. There were times when Jack would pull away, retreating into his own world, and times when Ethan would act out, testing boundaries as if to see how far our love would stretch. One of the most challenging aspects was figuring out how to navigate discipline and decision-making. When Jack struggled in school, Lisa and I had to decide how involved I should be. "I don't want to overstep," I told her during one of our many late-night phone calls. She hesitated before replying, "You're his mother too. You have every right to be part of this." It was a simple statement, but it carried so much weight. It was a reminder that our roles weren't defined by biology alone. They were shaped by love, effort, and the willingness to show up, even when it was hard. The boys, despite their initial confusion, began to embrace the idea of having two families. They started referring to each other as brothers, a word that brought tears to my eyes the first time I heard it. Jack taught Ethan how to play chess, and Ethan introduced Jack to his favorite video games. Watching them grow closer was like witnessing a small miracle, proof that even in the face of unimaginable circumstances, connection was possible. But the process wasn't without its setbacks. There were moments of jealousy, particularly for Ethan, who sometimes felt like he was losing us to Jack. "You spend so much time with him," he said one night, his voice trembling. "What about me?" It was a gut-wrenching moment, but also a necessary one. It forced us to reevaluate how we were dividing our time and attention, ensuring that both boys felt equally loved and valued. As time went on, the lines between our two families began to blur in the best possible way. We celebrated birthdays together, cheered from the sidelines at soccer games, and even took a joint vacation, a chaotic but unforgettable trip to the beach. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension and unresolved feelings, but there was also a growing sense of unity. We were learning, slowly but surely, how to navigate this new reality together. One of the most profound moments came during a quiet evening at home. Jack was sitting at the dining table working on a school project, while Ethan was sprawled on the couch, reading a book. The scene was so ordinary, yet it struck me as extraordinary. This was our life now. Messy, complicated, and beautiful in its own way. And for the first time in a long time I felt a sense of peace. But even as we found our rhythm, I knew there were still deeper wounds to heal, questions to answer, and challenges to face. The journey of rebuilding wasn't over. It was just beginning. Rebuilding a life that had been shattered by a revelation so profound felt like trying to piece together a broken vase. No matter how carefully you glued it back together, the cracks remained visible. But over time I realized something. Those cracks didn't make the vase any less beautiful, they told its story. And that's exactly what we were doing, learning how to live with our scars while creating something new. The first step was learning how to embrace our new normal. I won't lie, it wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of everything we'd been through felt suffocating. I'd catch myself staring at Jack, wondering what kind of mother I would have been if I'd known he was mine from the beginning. Then I'd look at Ethan and feel a pang of guilt for even entertaining those thoughts. Balancing the love I had for both boys was like walking a tightrope, but it was a walk I was willing to take every day, no matter how exhausting it was. Lisa and I became each other's support system in a way that still surprises me. At first, our relationship was built on necessity. We had to coordinate schedules, decisions, and therapy sessions for the boys. But over time it turned into something more. We'd call each other late at night, sharing our fears and frustrations. She once admitted, "I didn't think I could do this. I didn't think I could share him with you." I laughed through tears and told her I felt the same way. Somehow, knowing we were both struggling made it easier to keep going. The boys, bless them, were stronger than we ever gave them credit for. They adapted in ways that were nothing short of remarkable. Sure, there were moments of confusion and frustration, like the time Ethan blurted out, "So who's my real mom?" during a family dinner. But those moments became opportunities for honesty and connection. We made a point to reassure them over and over that real wasn't about biology or time. It was about love. And slowly they began to believe it. One of the most pivotal moments in our journey came during a family therapy session. The therapist asked the boys what they thought about their new family dynamic. Jack, ever the thoughtful one, said, "It's weird, but it's kind of cool too. I get 2 moms and 2 dads, and not everyone has that." Ethan, in his usual straightforward way, added, "Yeah, but sometimes it's annoying. Like, do I have to do double the chores?" We all laughed, and for the first time in a long time it felt like we were a team, imperfect but a team nonetheless. Rebuilding wasn't just about the boys, though. It was about us as parents too. My husband and I had to confront some hard truths about our relationship. The stress of everything we'd been through had pushed us to our limits, but it also forced us to communicate in ways we never had before. We started carving out time for just us. Date nights, long walks, even just sitting on the porch together after the boys went to bed. It wasn't about escaping the chaos. It was about finding each other in the midst of it. The same was true for Lisa and Tom. They faced their own struggles, but they were committed to making things work. For their son, for our shared family, and for themselves. One night, during a joint family dinner, Tom raised a toast. "To resilience," he said, his voice steady. "And to finding a way forward, even when the path isn't clear." It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes about how far we'd come. As time went on, we found ourselves celebrating the small victories. The boys excelled in school, their bond grew stronger, and the awkwardness between our families began to fade. We even started new traditions: family game nights, annual camping trips, and a shared photo album where we documented every milestone, big or small. Those moments became the glue that held us together, a reminder that life, despite its imperfections, could still be full of joy. But the process wasn't without its setbacks. There were days when the pain of what we'd lost resurfaced, sharp and unrelenting. I'd see a baby picture of Jack on Lisa's mantle and feel a pang of jealousy, or I'd hear Ethan call Lisa Mom, and have to remind myself that it didn't diminish my role in his life. Those moments were tough, but they were also a testament to how much we cared. For the boys, for each other, and for the families we were building together. One of the most powerful lessons I learned during this journey was the importance of forgiveness. Forgiveness for the hospital, for the mistakes that had set all of this in motion. Forgiveness for myself, for the moments when I doubted whether I was enough for both boys. And forgiveness for Lisa and Tom, for being the other side of a coin none of us asked to flip. It wasn't about forgetting or excusing what had happened. It was about letting go of the anger and resentment that threatened to consume us. By the time the first anniversary of our discovery rolled around, we had settled into a rhythm that, while unconventional, worked for us. We weren't just two separate families anymore. We were something in between. The boys had come to see each other as brothers, and we had learned to navigate the complexities of co-parenting with grace and humor. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Looking back now, I realized that what we went through changed me in ways I never could have imagined. Tested my strength, my patience, and my capacity for love. But it also taught me that family isn't defined by blood or circumstance. It's defined by the people who show up day after day, no matter how hard it gets. What if I told you that the life you've been living, the family you've built, the love you've shared, was all based on a mistake? Imagine raising a child for 10 years, only to find out they weren't yours. Sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it? But this isn't fiction. It happened to me, and it turned my entire world upside down. This isn't just a story about a shocking discovery or the unimaginable pain of learning your child was switched at birth. It's about navigating the impossible, balancing love, biology, and identity while trying to rebuild a family that was never truly broken, but never truly whole either. Stick around as I take you through the raw, unfiltered reality of how I found out, how I confronted the hospital, and how my family and I learned to heal. You'll hear about moments of heartbreak, hope, and yes, even love in the midst of chaos. By the end, I hope this story reminds you of the incredible resilience we all have inside us, especially when it comes to family. If you're ready to dive into one of the most emotional journeys you've ever heard, hit that like button, follow this channel, and leave a comment below. What does family mean to you? Let's start this conversation together. And while the pain of those lost years will always linger, it's overshadowed by the joy of the life we've built. A life filled with love, laughter, and the unshakable belief that even in the face of the unimaginable, we found a way to heal. As I sit here now, reflecting on the past few years, it feels almost surreal. What started as a discovery that shattered my reality has become a story of resilience, connection, and love that I never could have imagined. It wasn't easy, not by a long shot. There were moments when I thought I couldn't go on, moments when the weight of what we'd been through felt like too much to bear. But somehow, through all the chaos, we found our way. The journey has left me with scars, no doubt about it. There are still days when I wonder about the what-ifs. What if the hospital hadn't made that mistake? What if I'd raised Jack from the beginning? What if Lisa and Tom had been the ones to kiss Ethan's scraped knees and cheer him on at his soccer games? Those questions will always linger in the back of my mind, but they no longer consume me. Because I've come to realize that the life we've built, as messy and complicated as it is beautiful in its own right. The boys are thriving in ways that make my heart swell with pride. Jack has opened up so much. His quiet curiosity has turned into a confidence that shines through in everything he does. Ethan is as spirited as ever, his laughter filling our home with a warmth that reminds me why I fought so hard to protect the family we've created. And the bond between them. It's nothing short of a miracle. They call each other brothers now, and they mean it. Watching them navigate this unique relationship has been one of the greatest joys of my life. Our blended family has become something of an anomaly in our community, a story people talk about with a mix of fascination and admiration. Some still don't understand how we've managed to make it work, but honestly, neither do I sometimes. All I know is that love, messy, imperfect, unconditional love, is what keeps us going. It's what binds us together, even when the world feels like it's falling apart. The relationships between the adults have evolved too. Lisa and I have gone from hesitant co-parents to genuine friends. We've laughed together, cried together, and supported each other through some of the hardest moments of our lives. Tom and my husband have formed their own bond, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. The four of us have become a team, united by the shared goal of giving our boys the best life possible. And while the journey hasn't erased the pain of what we've lost, it has given us something even more valuable: perspective. We've learned to cherish the present, to find joy in the little moments, and to let go of the anger and resentment that once threatened to consume us. We've discovered that family isn't about perfection. It's about showing up day after day for the people you love. If there's one thing I've taken away from this experience, it's the power of resilience. Life threw us a curveball we never saw coming, and it knocked us off our feet. But we got back up. We faced the unimaginable, and we found a way to not just survive but thrive. It's a lesson I hope my boys carry with them as they grow, that even in the face of heartbreak and uncertainty, there is always a way forward. So here we are, a family redefined but a family nonetheless. The journey hasn't been perfect, but it's been ours. And as I look toward the future, I'm filled with hope, because if we can overcome this, I truly believe we can overcome anything. And that's my story, a journey through heartbreak, discovery, and ultimately healing. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always pretty, but it taught me lessons I never expected to learn. Family isn't just about biology or tradition, it's about love, resilience, and the choices we make every single day to show up for the people we care about. Now let me ask you, what would you do if you found yourself in my shoes? How far would you go to rebuild your family, to fight for the truth, or to forgive? Share your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to hear what you think because this is a conversation worth having. And before you go, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. I've got so many more stories and lessons to share that you won't want to miss. Until next time, remember this. No matter how broken life feels, there's always a way to put the pieces back together. And sometimes those cracks make the story even more beautiful.